This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. A quick run through the markets for you to start the hour. There's another South African carrier, Comair, that's filed for voluntary bankruptcy protection today. It's had its shares suspended from trading at the JSE. Now, the board of the budget carrier says it doesn't expect flying operations to resume until either October or November at the earliest. In East Africa, Kenya's benchmark index was up above 2,000 points today for the first time in 6 weeks. All bank stocks, except for Standard Chartered, closed higher as well, with the country's two largest banks, KCB and Equity, dominating trading. The NSE 20, in fact, is about 3% higher so far in the quarter. Here's what's coming up tonight. Sudan is planning a gold boost to stabilize market prices and boost FX earnings. South Africa is facing a huge tax shortfall after the COVID-19 lockdown. And American firms are seeking broader tariff relief on tech imports from China. Our starting point at this hour is in Sudan, where the country's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has announced that the country is setting up a bourse for gold trading, and it will standardize prices in accordance with a global rate. In January, Africa's third largest gold producer started allowing private traders to export gold. It was a measure designed to crack down on smuggling and attract foreign currency into the country's deeply cash-strapped treasury. Now, before the new regulations, the central bank bought gold at a discount to the international price. As a result, an estimated 70 to 80% of it was actually smuggled abroad. That's according to government officials, and of course this did hurt treasury earnings. Sudan produced an estimated 93 tons of gold in 2018, coming in third on the continent after South Africa and Ghana. Over in East Africa, Kenya's central bank has announced the issuance of a 5-year, $470 million bond that is designed to raise funds for government spending. An auction for that note, in fact, will be held barely 24 hours from now. The central bank is encouraging investors to place bonds either through online banking facilities or through the mobile service that's called Treasury Mobile Direct. Still in East Africa, 2020 was the year that Safaricom planned on getting into the Ethiopian market of 100 million people with a lot of untapped opportunity. And then COVID-19 happened. Plans to have issued at least 2 telecommunication licenses in April in Ethiopia didn't happen. And plans to partially privatize Ethio Telecom, the vertically integrated monopoly over there, have been put off at least until after Ethiopia's elections, which were set for late August, but are also likely to be postponed. Now, a delayed entry into Ethiopia and a likely flat year for revenues still haven't put investors off Safaricom, apparently. Since the start of the quarter, its shares have actually risen by 12%. So far in 2020, it's actually fared better than the benchmark NSE 20 index. It's only fallen by about 5%. The index as a whole, however, is down by over a quarter. The company beat estimates on earnings per share and net earnings, which stood at about $694 million for the results in the fiscal year ending in March. Earlier on, I spoke to one of the analysts covering Safaricom, Tracy Kivunyo. I started by asking her if this pandemic would push out the Ethiopian expansion plans to 2021 or even far later.
I would pencil it in for 2021, even before COVID-19 came and all this. Still, I thought that March 2024 Ethiopian licenses was a very aggressive target. This is a very key theme for Safaricom going forward. They're still bidding. In fact, as we speak, they've not yet finished concluding the composition of the joint venture that they would like to use to bid for the license. So I would say that this is still quite far out, and I would put it in financial year 2022.
All of this does sound relatively cash flow positive, though, for the company, because on one hand, it doesn't have to start making that heavy investment, making provisions for licensing and capital investment in Ethiopia. And of course, CapEx is also going to reduce in the course of this year. I mean, is that broadly your thinking along the lines? Is that your broad thinking for this company?
Yes, for me, that's why I remain quite positive on the stock. I think these are temporary headwinds that they should be able to ride much faster than even what we see in the banks because it's just a slowdown in economic activity. And if we look at the capex components of the company, they've actually been able to get better bang for their buck in terms of how they're bargaining their contracts with suppliers. If we look at the network coverage, we're already talking about north of 70% in 4G. So the requirement for capex for Safaricom actually coming down, and the only large cash flow risk we could say would be yes, investing in Ethiopia, and second, the move into 5G, which I still think it's far out at this point. So Safaricom would still continue to remain quite cash flow positive, and that's a very good strength for them.
What about regulatory risk? I know at the very start of the budget, well, essentially the start of the debate cycle, really, for the finance bill for the next fiscal year, which starts in July. But with respect to Safaricom in particular, where do you see the most immediate regulatory risk coming from?
The biggest risk I see coming now is on pricing. Already as we speak, the parliament had launched a committee that's going to look into the cost of mobile termination rates, talking about asymmetric mobile termination rates for Safaricom, and more importantly, the transaction charges for M-Pesa. We've clearly seen, even through this period, that M-Pesa is a very vital part of financial services in Kenya. And so the cost of making those transactions is definitely going to be a key going forward, and that's a risk that we need to factor in to our focus.
But what about Fuliza? Because that has also been essentially a standout product, really, for Safaricom ever since it was introduced. And on the one hand, we're seeing this drive by the central bank to try and get a hold of what the governor is not so diplomatically referred to as fleas, essentially these digital-only non-deposit-taking lenders. Is Fuliza at risk? Is it a product that might face sanctions, if not from the central bank, from other authorities?
Yes. A lot of these lending platforms, even including Mshwari and other online lenders, are using terms such as facilitation fees to evade the cap on lending rates that we've seen. And so this is, we could call the rates to be quite high. And of course, looking at the cost of transactions as a risk, we would also extrapolate that to the cost of lending, or sorry, the cost of borrowing to the customers. Because we're talking about a 0.5% daily transaction charge on Fuliza. I mean, that's almost 15% per month on a loan should you take it for that long.
Because if a bank offered to lend at those kind of rates, I mean, it would be punitive. You'd have riots in the street and there would be demands to shut it down.
That's very true. And we have to also look at the fact that the administration costs of these lending platforms are very low compared to banks, which have to also have some other administration costs to add on to the cost of lending. So if we're to look at it, that we would say that yes, that transaction cost of lending would be at risk as well.
Now, employees in Nigeria's banking sector can breathe a little easier today after the country's central bank intervened to stop any layoffs in the banking sector. CBN has apparently reached an agreement with bank management under which any layoffs would require direct approval from the regulator. Here's CGTN's Deja Banmus with the details.
Those adjustments are required at a time where we see Armageddon or where we see great...
News of the planned job cards broke after this leaked video of a bank executive meeting with his senior staff over a massive layoff went viral on social media. The bank had been planning to cut about 75% of its workforce. The video prompted a deluge of reactions, even from the country's main labor union.
You can't have an organization that donated billions of naira to government to fight COVID-19. And the MD of such organization is coming back now to tell you that they want to now sack workers. That is not commiserable in any form. For us, it's anti-worker, it's anti-people.
Less than 3 days after the viral video was published, the central bank intervened and met with bank executives to address the issue. The Apex Bank then issued a statement saying, quote, "In order to help minimize and mitigate the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on families and livelihoods, no bank in Nigeria shall retrench or lay off any staff of any cadre, including full-time and part-time. To give effect to the above measure, the express approval of the Central Bank of Nigeria shall be required in the event that it becomes absolutely necessary to lay off any such staff. End of quote.
I believe the CBN intervention is something that we should commend. It's a very timely intervention, especially in the light of what is happening in the economy. And it is also important in the sense that businesses have responsibility to their shareholders, but they also have responsibility to society. I think that is one message I think the CBN is also trying to drive home.
Nigerian banks are facing a very tough time. Apart from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the collapse in oil prices sent shivers down their spine, as many of them are heavily exposed to the oil and gas industry. If prices do not rebound, they might become steeped in huge bad debts.
Of course, the banks have been exposed. There are challenges in terms of the risk that there will be an increase in non-performing loans coming from the oil sector, coming from some other businesses as well. Of course, there will be those challenges. People will suffer losses. And it's not only banks that are suffering losses. Manufacturing sector is also suffering losses. We can manage all of these things without necessarily laying off staff. And in any case, even the capacity to absorb some of these shocks, I think it's higher even in the banking industry more than in any other sector.
For now, workers in the country's banking sector have been spared, but it remains to be seen whether the banks will be able to hold on for the long term. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
Quick run through some company headlines here for you. So Vodacom has announced the launch of 5G commercial networks in 3 cities in South Africa: Pretoria, Cape Town and Johannesburg. It's been able to do this, and this is Africa's first live commercial 5G network, which supports both mobile and fixed wireless services, and is currently available in 20 sites. Vodacom said the rollout comes after it got temporary spectrum allocation from the Independent Communications Authority. Vodacom expects a surge in mobile network traffic and also in fixed traffic as well following the deployment of this network. The taxi-hailing app Bolt has launched a courier service that allows companies to deliver goods to their clients. Courier prices in Kenya will be based on Bolt's budget service. It charges less than $1 per kilometer. The new service also enables multiple deliveries to be handled by the same vehicle. Now, the tech and transport company, formerly known as Taxify, has rolled out this new delivery service in the markets it operates in Africa and in Europe to widen both its service offering and its revenue base. The whiskey brand Chivas Regal is tackling lockdown difficulties faced by small businesses with a launch of a Business Unusual program. It's essentially a 5-week Instagram live series designed to support small business owners who are struggling during this pandemic. The campaign hopes to inject some inspiration through stories from industry leaders who've been through some very tough seasons and survived. We're seeing an increasing number of enterprises reporting that they've run out of financial runway to see them through this lockdown. And speaking of financial runways, the Australian carrier Qantas Airways has secured about $550 million in debt funding using some of its aircraft, Boeing 787-9s, as collateral. This new funding line follows a previous amount of just over $1 billion raised in March against 7 other aircraft, 787-9s as well. This essentially gives the carrier sufficient liquidity to respond to a range of different recovery scenarios if conditions persist until at least December 2021. That said, the airline still anticipates a net cash burn rate of about $40 million a week up to the end of June. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up shortly. South Africa is facing a vast tax shortfall after the COVID-19 lockdown. And we'll go through a special series of stories looking at how COVID-19 has had an impact on livelihoods in Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sue Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. South Africa's economy, Africa's most industrialized, was essentially put on ice as the country was put into a level 5 lockdown for 5 weeks in March. Now, part of that lockdown included the closure of most industrial sectors besides the power utility Eskom and coal suppliers. Now, though, the country is at level 4, with some restrictions being lifted as authorities attempt to restart this economy. Angela Coppola takes a look at one area, tax collection.
The tax authorities estimate the total annual revenue shortfall would be about $15 billion. On corporate taxes, there was a 55% decline in April, and VAT refunds were 12% lower. The authorities have already lost around $255 million in taxes as the sale of alcohol and cigarettes is still banned.
SARS collects those taxes essentially from the manufacturers at source. So in this current situation, obviously they've stopped producing because they've just been building up inventories at this point in time, or they're sitting on inventories at this stage. So by not producing, essentially SARS is foregoing those taxes at the very early stage.
The tax loss from cigarette and alcohol sales is water under the bridge.
It's difficult to imagine that smokers are suddenly going to be smoking more to make up, and the same goes with drinkers. It's unlikely that would ever be made up, and in fact, 99% of it will probably never be made up.
While those sin taxes are gone, there are other taxes that have also been lost.
There are other taxes that are forgone as part of that, and that includes the VAT and ultimately your corporate income tax, which then trickles down into dividends tax as well. So the tax impact is throughout the full extent of the taxes or tax types that we have as well. And that is a little bit more difficult to quantify.
There was a 19.7% decline in import taxes, with import VAT down 25% and customs duty down 11.8%. As the authorities attempt to get the economy kick-started again, there's still going to be a huge revenue shortfall, and that's not going to be made up anytime soon. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now then, at this point in time, with a lot of people working from home, telecommunication companies in Tunisia have recorded an increase in online video content consumption, the use of social media and chat applications too. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi now with the data on consumption during this lockdown period.
Tunisia Telecom is the main operator in Tunisia. The company has been following the usage curve since the beginning of the lockdown to avoid a sudden peak.
In theory, people go to work in the morning. Data usage is from office and the peak at home is at night. Now, the two time slots have overlapped and the peak lasts from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m.
The executive director of the business market at Tunisia Telecom adds that the country's leading operator has coped with a 20 to 25% increase in internet data usage.
Tunisia Telecom acted from the first week to avoid any congestion by increasing the capacity of international bandwidth because it impacts us with two other operators. We increased the capacity of the national networks, the backbone, and internet service providers. We also improved the quality of the bandwidth, which is dedicated to indoor mobile usage.
Exabyte is one of the internet service providers in the North African country. The company has also recorded an unusual usage in the months of March and April.
COVID-19 has had a huge impact on internet. Revenues are up, especially from private clients who are confined at home. Usage numbers have nearly doubled compared to January. However, consumption at enterprises was down as people opted to work remotely.
Despite the relentless pressure on its technical departments, as well as the online and mobile customer service platforms, Tunisia Telecom and internet service providers have been able to guarantee quality service until the end of the general lockdown. Analysts assert that the COVID-19 crisis has pushed up internet usage due to the streaming of movies, online meetings, and the long hours of connection to the social networks. Tunisia Telecom and internet providers are expected to record major milestones in data revenue. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's start the segment in the world's youngest country, South Sudan. 8 agencies operating over there, which has been rocked, of course, by long-running civil conflict, have launched a program that's designed to provide information about COVID-19 to the vulnerable groups that they support. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has the details.
Hassan Konyi lives in a refugee camp near Juba known as Don Bosco. Getting correct information on COVID-19 here is difficult. Most residents don't have access to news via television or radio. Hassan has been educated about coronavirus and preventive measures by a non-governmental organization, World Vision. That means Hassan can now pass on that knowledge to other residents.
Everybody is now staying at home because they are listening to the information we are giving them about the coronavirus. Before we started this awareness campaign, people were not following the directives from the health ministry to avoid social functions. They were not even staying home. But that has changed now.
The stay-home directive is affecting many workers who used to depend on daily income to feed their families.
I have no job now. I am just sitting at home. All work has stopped. I am worried. The little money I have saved is finished.
The World Food Programme says more than half the South Sudan's population of 11 million people were already food insecure before restrictions were put in place to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
There are changes. The changes is that previously we used to provide the beneficiaries one-man ratio, but because of these changes, for fear of COVID-19, we don't know what will it happen, when will it happen. So we have decided to give 2 months ratio for our beneficiaries.
South Sudan's health ministry has launched a door-to-door campaign in the capital Juba to give the public information on coronavirus. Aid agencies say they want to carry out sensitization on the coronavirus across the country wherever they take services to the needy. The government has declared an indefinite partial lockdown, so it is not clear how long the vulnerable people will be facing these extra challenges in their daily lives. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
As the world continues to tackle this pandemic, governments are scrambling to find ways of supporting their citizens, particularly those hit hardest by lockdowns. In South Africa, for example, the government has distributed thousands of water tanks countrywide to ensure that water supplies are adequate during this crisis. CGTN's Yolisa Ndemela filed this report from Johannesburg.
South Africa is a water-scarce country, and the coronavirus pandemic comes at a time when the country is experiencing shortages of water and crippling drought. The water challenges are caused by a number of issues. These include insufficient water infrastructure operations and maintenance, floods driven by climatic variation, and unequal access to water and sanitation. The COVID-19 has highlighted the connection between accessing water and exposure to illness, especially for people living in poverty. Members of this community, for instance, have not had access to clean water for years.
Since we've got the corona situation, and then we started to see people coming with the new tanks, installing them.
I'm next to the tap, but if like I'm not around, it's difficult. But now I'm next to the tap. I make sure that like I've got enough water before I go to job.
Following President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement for government to devise extraordinary measures to slow the spread of the virus, the Department of Water and Sanitation has made urgent interventions.
Our job is to make sure that everybody in South Africa, to the extent that it is possible, has access to clean water, even if it is for a short term, as we build up our systems for a more sustainable future.
Needy communities from the length and breadth of the country are now benefiting from the distribution of water tanks that have been made available by government.
Right now, as of the time when COVID was on our shores, we had to make sure everybody has clean water to wash their hands. So we ordered all the water tanks that we could get, and we then decided to lease water tankers to put water. And we asked the municipalities to identify those places that where people would be most vulnerable or where people congregate. And they have done that. The reports that I've seen, the smiles that I've seen, indicates to me that we've made very good progress, and I'm very happy to see that.
These tanks will assist communities in water-stressed and densely populated areas to wash their hands to ward off the virus. Yolison Jomela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to the Democratic Republic of Congo now. Persons living with disabilities there have been appealing to the government for assistance amid a partial lockdown in Africa's largest copper exporter. The pandemic has disrupted economic activity there, and it's affected the livelihoods of thousands of vulnerable people. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has the details.
Messages about the prevention of COVID-19 are common in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. The city has the most cases in the country. The government imposed a partial lockdown earlier this month and offered people free water and electricity for the next 2 months. But many communities on the outskirts of the city do not have access to clean water. That has made life difficult for people living with disabilities like Ngoi Kabea.
I'm asking our government to help us in this difficult time. President Tshisekedi should instruct his staff to provide us food and water because life has become unbearable. God will bless him for that.
Humanitarian agencies have been supporting the government to provide relief items to internally displaced people in conflict zones in eastern DRC. But many vulnerable people in Kinshasa are struggling on their own.
We've seen some people getting assistance from charity organizations during the lockdown, but we've not got any help. Why has our government neglected us?
Officials at the COVID-19 National Task Force say they are doing their best under the circumstances.
We have sensitized the country about the prevention and control of COVID-19 through the media, but we ask everyone to join us in spreading the message about hand washing and social distancing.
But that might not be enough for many. The DRC Constitution provides special protection for people living with disabilities, but many of them have faced discrimination and human rights abuses for decades. Not even the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that the government ratified in 2015 has greatly improved their lives, and now the COVID-19 pandemic has made their plight worse. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Children with disabilities may have underlying health conditions that do increase the risk of getting some pretty serious complications if infected with COVID-19. Here's Ramah Nyang now reporting on how caretakers in Uganda are adapting to their needs.
The past 5 weeks have been testing for Tim Wanamama. He has Down syndrome, and coping with life during the coronavirus crisis has been tough.
The first 2 weeks, they were so bored, but after some time they coped up.
During school days, over 80 children play here. Tim now has only a handful to be with. Many of the children at this center were sent home. The few that stayed need extra attention, and the singing is helping them cope with the trying time. The caretakers here say the children miss their friends, but they are teaching them new things to keep them busy.
Their children, you have to be patient and understand them better. We do things and repeatedly actually, compared to the ordinary children.
According to the World Child Organization UNICEF, Uganda has about 2.5 million children living with some form of disability. Authorities say parents and guardians need to help children understand the current challenge.
They are playing a role of many people. They are teachers, they are health workers, because remember many of those children have health-related challenges, many of them. They are social workers, they need to keep counseling. While it is still uncertain how soon the coronavirus crisis will end, for these children, their isolation is far from over. They must do whatever they can to get through. Ramah Nyang, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, the month of Ramadan is one of the most important occasions for Muslims around the world, but it's also a crucial period for those in enterprises. Given that it's happening in the middle of a pandemic, 2020's Ramadan is wildly different, to put it mildly. One of the most affected enterprises are lantern manufacturers. You see, in Egypt, buying a lantern is part of the tradition at this time of the year, but given the economic damage being inflicted by this pandemic, a lot less people can afford to do that. CGTN's Adel Esmaruki now explains.
All year long, Ahmed Mohammed and his team work tirelessly to prepare for the holy month of Ramadan. They carefully decorate and shape tin plates. Step by step, the structure of their product takes shape. They make fawanis, Arabic for lanterns, the outstanding icon for Ramadan. This is usually their peak season. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has ruined it.
Clients are holding on to food purchases this year. They won't buy lanterns. It's only for decoration. The vendors, our usual clients, are unable to pick up their orders because they don't know how they will sell. My storage is full. Vendors cannot set up on the streets because the government is forbidding them. And there is a curfew, so no night sales.
Lanterns production includes glass manufacturing and printing over them. Like Ahmed's, these industries too have been affected by the recession that has been caused by the pandemic. Nonetheless, the team in this workshop continuously changed their display, hoping these bright colors would tempt clients to come over. Whenever pedestrians pass by the market, they make sure to approach them.
I love the Egyptian lanterns. It's handmade. You feel it's more authentic than those which are imported. We are quite skilled in making them. For my family, Ramadan cannot start without buying a new lantern. Because of the pandemic, the prices are same like last year's. Some lanterns have even become cheaper. Merchants want to sell, even if it's at a lower cost.
Lanterns manufacturers say sales have dropped by nearly half this year. Prices vary from just $1 for the small ones to $20 for the medium-sized and $80 for the biggest. Many Egyptians are under financial pressure this Ramadan. Still, some are buying a new lantern anyway. They cannot miss participating in a tradition that has been preserved for at least 600 years. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
We're just past 18:30 GMT. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up shortly. US firms are seeking broader tariff relief on tech gadgets from China. And gym equipment sales have risen sharply in Germany amidst this pandemic. We'll explore if this is sustainable next.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Major American firms and trade groups want the US Trade Representative's office to waive tariffs on a broad range of Chinese-made products due to this pandemic. Now, they're arguing that the previous waivers directly related to medical care products like ventilators simply don't go far enough. And they're saying that these exemptions should be significantly broader to include things like drones, robots, personal computers and 3D printers. The group says that the current tariffs are a barrier to the entry of necessary products and a harmful tax on both businesses and consumers. This COVID-19 pandemic, of course, continues to inflict significant damage up and down the United States, even hitting farmers who work in wide open fields. For them, social distancing isn't as big a problem as it is in densely populated cities. But they do worry about the future, specifically what the global economy will be like once their harvests come to market. CGTN's Sean Caleb spoke to one farmer in South Georgia who has come to rely on buyers in China.
The sun is shining on Randy Hudson's pecan farm deep in the heart of Georgia. He needed a strong growing season after struggling through a prolonged rough patch.
It has been roaring hell out here at times in the last couple years in more ways than one.
He's replanted after losing some 20% of his most productive trees to a hurricane. And financially, he is still smarting from the tariff war between China and the United States. That was especially bad, considering he sells 85% of his nuts to China.
And then we're coming into this year and we say, well, everything's going to be fine, and lo and behold, here comes COVID.
He usually has about 40 employees working the fields. That number has been cut nearly in half. Safety meetings are routine with his transient field hands.
We know to keep our distance, right?
Yes, sir.
That's right. We can't afford for nobody to get sick.
Here on a farm that is hundreds and hundreds of acres, social distancing is not the problem. Of course, Hudson has concerns about his family, especially his young grandchildren. And like so many people across the United States, he's wondering when the economy will bounce back and what the new normal will look like.
All right, well, I'll go over there now and turn it on for you.
Work goes on, and Hudson says everything is looking great.
And what you see there are little small pecans, just been pollinated.
But the specter of the virus looms large. Hudson wonders who will buy his pecans come fall harvest.
I'm more concerned about cranking this economy back up, not here, but also around the world. For the economy to get back and for people to begin to go back to normal.
Soft-spoken and country smart, Hudson holds a PhD. He was one of the pioneers bringing the pecan to a brand new market decades ago, China.
They actually gave it a name, and the name which is most widely accepted right now in China for pecan is beacon guo.
China and the United States, his two top markets, hit hard by the coronavirus. And like many, he is concerned the disease will strike back with a vengeance in the fall.
Until we have a vaccine, this virus is going to be here. We just will accept the fact that people are going to get sick.
He was hoping to do $50 million in business after bringing in a paltry 10% of that last season. But if science and common sense don't fend off the virus, this fall could bring a bitter harvest. Sean Caleb, CGTN, Osceola, Georgia.
A bitter harvest indeed. Over in Belgium, the first phase of a gradual reopening of the economy started on Monday. In this phase, companies with no face-to-face customers can reopen if remote working is not an option. And that's to be followed by all shops reopening on the 11th of May, and then the first group of students to go back to school on the 18th. Social distancing rules do apply in all of these cases. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with the details.
Despite the beginning of the end of the coronavirus lockdown, activity in Belgium's usually busy streets is sparse and trams near empty. Like elsewhere in Europe, Belgium has experienced an economic hit that has led to the pressure to reopen as the health emergency eases.
I had to put my saleswoman and repairman on furlough. I worked 7 days a week, nearly day and night on repairs, and I was all alone. It was not easy. So now we are really happy to have the team back to go on normally, but the work just keeps coming and the demand is very high.
Few people in the streets can be seen without masks, most appearing to have been stitched at home.
I put myself forward to make between 25 and 35 masks a week. And so as I go home, I get my material and I sew.
With the spurring on of creativity is the rise in demand for commodities to support in the call to adhere to safety rules.
We did not have a lot of demand to supply accessories except for rubber bands, and now I had 40 to 50 calls a day just to ask if I had rubber bands, whereas normally it's something we would never sell. We sold maybe 10 meters a year, and now I could sell kilometers and kilometers of the stuff.
A densely populated country of 11.5 million inhabitants, the coronavirus has killed more than 7,900 people in Belgium, the highest per capita mortality rate officially recorded anywhere. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
This COVID-19 pandemic is having an enormous impact on every aspect of business around the world. That includes the multi-billion-dollar trade in fresh flowers. From Thailand, here's CGTN's Martin Lowe.
Tropical orchids grown in the fertile plains of central Thailand are a multi-million-dollar business. They're exported to more than 30 countries, including China, Europe and the US. Fresh flowers are a luxury item, sought after by companies, hotels and restaurants for meetings, weddings and conferences. But almost all of these events are now cancelled. For Thai orchid growers, it's spelled disaster. Every day, lorry loads of flowers are having to be dumped as orders have disappeared. They can no longer be exported as flights have been grounded. Demand has fallen by 95%.
Incomes have fallen to just 3 to 5% of normal, but the cost of growing is still 100%. There's even extra cost to cut the flowers and throw them away.
The Thai orchid industry provides an income for up to 100,000 workers. Half of all the flowers grown are normally exported, earning almost $90 million in 2018.
Normally at this time prices would be high, but they've been falling since the beginning of the year. Now we have no income and growers are going bankrupt.
The orchid is the symbol for Thailand's national airline. It's closely associated here with the tourism industry. But that's another sector that's collapsed as the virus has put an end to global travel. Many growers wonder if they can survive until business returns. Here at Bangkok's normally bustling flower market, there's an air of near abandonment. Flowers are still being traded, but at a fraction of the normal volume and price.
I've cut my prices, but I still have to buy flowers from the farms to keep a good relationship and to help each other in these difficult times. But if I can't sell them, I have to throw them away.
There's a feeling of deep gloom amongst the stems and petals. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Thailand.
Flower distributors in and out of the Netherlands all have taken a hit as people slash spending and postpone events amidst this pandemic. Royal Flora Holland is the world's largest flower auction. It's based in that very country. Now, the company's sales have dropped by about 50% each week in the 5 weeks leading up to the 17th of April compared to the same period last year. Weak demand has hurt Africa's leading flower growers as well. Ethiopia, for example, earned about $280 million through its flower trade in its last fiscal year. But right now, it's only exporting about 20% of its usual volume. Across the Atlantic, many small flower shop owners in America are under pressure because celebrations and events like weddings have been cancelled and major festivals in the first quarter are completely stopped. Some wholesale markets as well are still shut down. In India, police used batons to beat back thirsty citizens who were scrambling to buy alcohol for the first time in some 40 days as the government there eased back some restrictions. Authorities in India do credit their relatively harsh shutdown of almost all activity since late March with keeping the tally of cases to a relatively modest 42,500 with 1,400 people dead. But it's also caused misery on the flip side for millions of workers in India's vast informal sector who were suddenly jobless without an income, and that just added to the economic misery in Asia's third largest economy. Adding to some relaxations for industry and agriculture last month, offices can now operate at 1/3 of their capacity.
The alcohol shop got too crowded and got very chaotic, so the police closed the shop down.
I still feel they need to be very cautious about how they are handling the whole thing and implementing the lockdown, the relaxation. Because there are a lot of people who are taking, they are getting very happy about the entire thing and they are going full speed ahead, not realizing that not only can they be carriers, but they can put other people at risk.
I think the government is doing the right thing. Only hotspots they are locking down. There is no point in keeping everyone, because economic activity has to move on. Otherwise, we will die economically, financially.
On to Asia's largest economy now. Shanghai's shopping malls are hosting a variety of events and offering promotions to try and get customers back in during the Double 5 shopping festival. Sun Suchi has the details.
This morning, 10 lucky customers won coupons from Bailian outlet with each worth 5,500 yuan.
I spent 800 yuan at the supermarket under Bailian. I'm so happy after winning this coupon and will go shopping once more.
Hundreds of customers won coupons worth 1,500 yuan each.
During the past week, about 13 million customers visited our company's shopping malls, and more than 3.6 million people visited our online stores. That matched the best conditions before the epidemic.
At #1 department store on East Nanjing Road, group purchase discount coupons can be combined with other discounts.
For jewelry, customers will receive a 200 yuan discount for every 2,000 yuan they spend. A 40 yuan per gram discount is being given on gold. It's rare to see such a large discount.
350 retailers are participating at the Qingpu outlet. Its revenue has exceeded 100 million yuan since May 1st. That is nearly 6% more than the same period last year.
I often go shopping at outlets. but it's my first time to see such a good discount like today.
At the Kerry Centre in Jing'an District, residents were also attracted by markets selling flowers, pet toys, and accessories.
We called store owners and designers to show their products at the market to help them resume their businesses.
The double-decker bus number 911 resumed operation on May 1st. The route passes many shopping malls along Huaihai Road, and the operator is encouraging passengers to take part in the Double Five Shopping Festival. Sun Ziqi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, one of Germany's largest online retailers say that sales of fitness equipment have surged by as much as 600% since the pandemic started. Now, that's one trend which equipment manufacturers are hoping might be here to stay. Iris Bitzer filed this report for What's Hot tonight.
Komm jetzt zu dir nach Hause.
The Vaha Interactive Fitness Mirror promises to help you get in shape. And with Germany's fitness studios closed due to the coronavirus, the startup company's founder says it has some distinct advantages.
Go with the flow.
You don't have to go somewhere. The personal trainer doesn't have to meet you somewhere and drive there. You can have that person right in your living room.
In Germany and around the world, people under orders to mostly stay home are experimenting with new ways of staying fit. For Germany's second largest online retailer, Otto, that's led to a surge in demand.
For fitness equipment, there's been an increase in sales of as much as 600%, especially for strength training devices such as dumbbells.
But what will happen when things return to normal and fitness studios reopen?
One thing home fitness equipment makers have going for them, like the company Peloton, whose bike I'm riding now, is that a lot of new people are trying their products. They're hoping we get hooked on not having to leave the house to break a sweat.
Okay, Peloton, let's go.
New technologies, such as enhanced ability for live interaction, were already having a big impact before the crisis hit. Allied Market Research recently projected the global fitness equipment market to grow by 3.5% annually over the next 7 years.
I believe it is definitely probably an enhancer of the whole market, but it's not that it's just a trend which just came now because of Corona and will fully go down. I don't believe that.
But when fitness studios come back online and lockdowns continue to be lifted, equipment makers will have to hope people still want to stay home instead of going to a gym or heading outside. Iris Bitzer, CGTN, Berlin.
All right, then, I'll run through commodity prices for you. So Brent has had a rather outstanding session today. The July contract, in fact, is up over 14% in a matter of about 15 minutes ago. $31 a barrel is the number we're looking at. It's the first time we've been at that point. In fact, over $30 a barrel since the middle of April, as the cuts that OPEC Plus members agreed to now start to kick in. On the soft side, tea output here in Kenya relatively strong for the first quarter of 2020, rising by over 49% to 158 million kilos year on year. The East African country is the world's biggest exporter of that commodity. Average auction prices in the first quarter, however, did fall marginally by about 3.5% in the first quarter of 2020. Here's what's coming up next. Tanzanian hairstylists are struggling to stay afloat amidst this pandemic. We'll hear their stories when we come back. Welcome back. Let's head over to Tanzania. The country's president, John Magufuli, is being criticized for what some argue is a deeply lax response to this pandemic. The head of the country's national health lab, which is in charge of testing for this pathogen, has been suspended a day after the head of state questioned the accuracy of test results. However, he did not specify exactly where the test kits being used by the national lab were imported from. Weeks of social distancing in the East African economy have affected professionals who have been making a living by being in close contact with others. CGTN's Alexander Majala explains.
The coronavirus pandemic has businesses around the world grappling to stay afloat. Barbershops and salons all over the world are feeling the effects of the presence of the virus in some way, shape or form, with some reporting dwindling numbers of customers. And Tanzanian barbers are no different.
Business has really gone down because many customers are afraid that if they come to the barber shop, it will result in them getting infected with the coronavirus, and so business has slumped.
Tanzania, unlike its EAC neighbors, hasn't declared a nationwide lockdown. Instead, schools and colleges have been closed, social gatherings banned, unnecessary movements prohibited, and international flights suspended. Majority of hair salons and barbershops remain in operation, albeit with fewer customers. Despite these challenging times, Yakwetu Barbershop in Dar es Salaam is leveraging their emphasis on protective measures for their employees and customers to keep the business afloat amidst the pandemic.
Based on the situation out there, people must be scared to go to barbershops. But it's different here. Things work smoothly. When you get here, they check your body temperature, you come to the chairs that you sit on, they are sanitized, and even the person cutting your hair has sanitized their hands. This is a much better place.
According to WHO, Tanzania's delay in enforcing stricter measures to prevent the further spread of coronavirus in the country may have led to the recent spike in positive cases. But for now, the government has left it up to hairstylists and barbers to take the personal decision on whether to continue operating their businesses. For those that close, it's a decision that will cut off their only source of income for what could be weeks or months to come. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And finally, a hair salon in Kibera, it's one of Nairobi's best-known informal settlements, has created a new spiky look called the coronavirus hairstyle. It's essentially a blend of fashion statement on one hand, but also slick public health messaging on the other. And it's the latest example of how service industry workers are finding ways of keeping the money coming in, even as stay-at-home orders drastically cut customer traffic.
Hakuna cha braids, hakuna cha salsa, hakuna cha wig, weave, ni coronavirus mama. Mali huko, kama ukishuke coronavirus.
Hii wakati wa coronavirus tunaathirika nayo. Hii style tunasuka, ndio tunashuka kwa wananchi, ndio rahisi kulingana maisha yamekuwa ngumu duniani kulingana na hii janga la coronavirus. Na kila mtu mahali yuko nukusanitize, kunawa mikono mara kwa mara, ndio tushinde hili jambo la coronavirus.
Corona imeleta shida, sasa mimi sina ile pesa ya kuwapeleka saluni washuke zile vitu za maana. Sasa ukiona hizi ni corona style, sasa mimi nimeona walete kwa saluni ishikilie tu nywele, sababu uchumi nayo imekuwa ngumu sana.
The corona style indeed. As far as public health messaging goes, can't argue with that. Quick run through the currencies for you. So South Africa's bond auction today had a flood of capital charging in through the doors. The central bank sought to raise about $240 million. It got nearly $1.6 billion in bids. Bulk of that focused on the 2026 and the 2030 notes on offer. So essentially, despite being kicked out of the FTSE World Government Bond Index after 2 downgrades, investors clearly still like the yields on offer. As for the rand itself, it seems to have found its footing against the American dollar. Yes, it's 31% weaker to the greenback so far in the year, but So far in the second quarter, it has barely changed. This, it would seem, is the new normal. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.